I never imagined that the people I raised, the children I had kissed goodnight and watched grow, could harbor a darkness so absolute. But as I lay there on the jagged rocks, blood soaking through my clothes, my husband's voice whispered in my ear like a lifeline, "Hilda, pretend we're dead." At first, the words felt absurd. We were alive, but the thought of playing dead while Damian and Melissa, the son and daughter-in-law we had welcomed into our lives, moved around us, smiling and calculating, was almost unbearable. Yet it was the only chance we had to survive. The gorge stretched out beneath us, cruel and silent, with jagged rocks like the teeth of some ancient predator. My body screamed with pain. My left leg refused to move, sharp shards of agony shooting from my hip down to my foot. My arm throbbed as if a hammer struck it repeatedly, and my head pounded with a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. Blood blurred my vision. Every breath was a struggle. And yet, through it all, Henry's hand pressed lightly against mine, grounding me. "Stay still. We can do this," he murmured, his own voice ragged with pain. From a few feet away, I could hear them, Damian and Melissa. Their voices were soft, deceptively tender, but I recognized the underlying cruelty. "Are they dead?" Melissa asked, feigning concern. I stifled a groan as I realized they were checking to see if we had survived the fall they orchestrated. "Both of them have their eyes open, but not breathing," Damian lied. My chest tightened. Their performance was meticulous, practiced. They had rehearsed every detail to convince the world that we were gone. And yet, even in that sickening moment, a spark of hope flickered. If they believed we were dead, maybe we could find a way to turn the tables. Minutes passed like hours. The cold wind bit at my skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. I tried to quiet my thoughts, to focus on survival rather than the betrayal that had shattered everything I believed about my family. Henry whispered fragments of his own agony, a broken leg, fractured ribs, pain everywhere. And yet, even in that shared misery, he found the presence of mind to recount what had really happened that night. Richard died the night our other son's life ended, and the quiet beginning of Damian's descent into darkness. Richard had confronted Damian about the money he had been stealing, small amounts at first, then larger sums over months. Henry's voice trembled as he recounted the argument, the evidence Richard held in his hands, the desperation in his face as he tried to make Damian understand the gravity of his betrayal. And then, the push. It had not been an accident. Damian had shoved his brother deliberately, his hands firm, his eyes wild with rage and something darker, an entitlement that I had never imagined. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mixing with the blood that dripped from my forehead. My son had killed his brother. And for what? Money? Power? Freedom from responsibility? I wanted to scream, to let my rage spill into the cold air, but I couldn't. To survive, I had to remain still, invisible, almost a ghost. We listened as Damian and Melissa discussed their next steps, crawling to find help, rehearsing their story of a tragic accident, ensuring their lies were perfect. Every word from their lips was a dagger, but also a roadmap. They had underestimated the strength of our will, the depth of our knowledge, and the cunning patience we could muster even in the worst of pain. Hours passed, and slowly, the world quieted around us. The weight of the night pressed down, the stars above indifferent to our suffering. And then, faintly at first, the distant whir of helicopters. Rescue teams. Our chance. Henry squeezed my hand, a silent reminder that we were not yet done. We had to play the part, to remain lifeless until the moment we could strike with truth, not violence. When the rescuers finally descended, their voices authoritative, kind and real, I realized the enormity of what we were doing. We were using every fragment of our acting ability, every ounce of our strength, to survive. I felt the paramedics' hands on me, checking for a pulse, fitting oxygen masks, securing stretchers. My body screamed to move, to cry out, to reveal that I was alive. But I held it back, every fiber of me focused on the one goal that mattered, exposing the truth. In the hospital, the nightmare did not end. Damian and Melissa's performance was flawless. They wept, they trembled, they hugged one another as if the world had been ripped from beneath them. And all the while, my pulse thumped in quiet defiance beneath my sheets. It was then that I noticed Inz, a young nurse, her gaze sharp and perceptive. She watched me with suspicion, her eyes narrowing as she sensed something unusual. I moved a finger, the smallest gesture, and she noticed immediately. A lifeline in human form, an ally I could trust. Through tiny signals, I communicated the danger we were in. She understood, and in that understanding, hope returned to me. Inns orchestrated a subtle, careful plan, pretending to check monitors, keeping watch, while she coordinated with doctors and the authorities. Damian and Melissa remained unaware, their confidence growing even as it set the stage for their undoing. When Damian whispered near my bed, speaking of buried truths and lessons I should have learned, I realized they were giving us exactly what we needed, evidence of their guilt. Every word, every misstep, was captured by the vigilant nurse and, more importantly, by Henry's recordings. The detective arrived, the team moved with precision, and for the first time in 25 years, I felt a measure of justice approaching. Damian and Melissa's world, so carefully constructed with lies and cruelty, was about to collapse under the weight of truth. And yet, even as the officers confirmed our safety and began securing the evidence, I felt the quiet, persistent ache of betrayal. How could someone I loved so completely harbor such darkness? How could years of nurturing and care be repaid with malice and murder? I carried those questions like stones in my chest, heavy and unyielding, knowing that even in justice, the emotional scars would remain. That night, in the sterile glow of the hospital room, I held Henry's hand and whispered promises to our grandchildren. We would protect them, raise them, and shield them from the toxicity that had nearly destroyed our family. We would honor Richard's memory. And above all, we would survive not just physically, but morally, emotionally, and spiritually. Because surviving meant more than escaping death. It meant reclaiming our truth, restoring justice, and proving that even in the depths of betrayal, courage, patience, and love could endure. Even as the rescue team lifted us from the gorge, the wind whipping past, I couldn't stop the memories from rushing back. The argument between Richard and Damian, the look in his eyes when he pushed him. It wasn't just a moment of anger. It was a calculated act, cold and deliberate. And now, my body battered and broken, I could feel the weight of that calculation pressing down on me. Henry groaned beside me, shifting on the stretcher, his face pale, streaked with blood. I pressed my hand to his arm. "We're still here," I whispered. "We made it." The helicopter ride to the hospital was surreal. The sound of the rotors thumped in time with my heartbeat. Every jolt sent pain radiating through my broken leg, my fractured ribs, and my bruised shoulder. But through it all, a strange clarity took hold. We had survived the fall. We were alive. And that meant we still had a chance to see justice done. Damian and Melissa had underestimated us. They believed we were broken beyond hope, but they had forgotten something fundamental. Pain can sharpen the mind, and desperation can fuel ingenuity. When we arrived at the hospital, chaos met us immediately. Nurses and doctors rushed past, shouting orders, wheels squeaking across the linoleum. I let them handle the logistics, closing my eyes to keep the pretense of unconsciousness. Henry groaned again, but he didn't let the staff realize the depth of his awareness either. We were living lie and truth simultaneously. It was exhausting, terrifying, and utterly necessary. Then I noticed her ins, the nurse who had been watching me since the moment we arrived. She moved with a subtle precision, checking monitors while sneaking glances at me. I shifted a finger slightly. 1, 2. She froze, understanding immediately. Relief flooded me. Someone else could see what we were facing. Someone who could act. "I know you're awake," she whispered, kneeling beside me when the room was quiet. "If you are in danger from those people who just left, you need to let me know." I moved my finger 3 times. She gasped softly, glancing around before leaning in to whisper, "Stay still. I'll protect you. I'll call the doctor." Minutes stretched like hours. My head throbbed with pain, my heart raced with fear, and my thoughts returned to the night of Richard's death. Damian's greed had begun as whispers, small manipulations of our finances, but it had escalated stealing, lying, and eventually, murder. And Melissa, his wife, had enabled him every step of the way. They were not just desperate, they were coldly, consciously evil. When the doctor arrived, accompanied by 2 police officers, I felt a flicker of hope I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. "Ma'am," one of the officers said gently, "I'm Detective Johnson. We understand you've been in a dangerous situation. Can you tell us what happened on the mountain?" My voice emerged as a rasp, barely audible, but it carried years of trauma and the raw truth. My son and his wife, they pushed us." The words tasted bitter, yet liberating. The next hours were a whirlwind. I recounted every horrifying detail: the argument over stolen money, Damian's deliberate shove that killed Richard, the meticulous planning, the lies rehearsed to fool the world. I spoke of every stolen dollar, every forged document, every cruel deception. Henry handed over his phone, loaded with recordings of Damian and Melissa confessing, sometimes carelessly, sometimes in moments of frustration and anger. Every admission, every plot, every calculated step was documented. The detective listened, his expression somber but focused. When he finally held Henry's phone, the weight of 2 decades of deception, theft, and murder became real in the room. "Your husband has recordings of everything?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes," I replied. "Every confession, every plan, every lie. It's all there." The officer nodded, understanding the gravity. This wasn't just an attempted murder. This was a lifetime of betrayal meticulously documented. Meanwhile, Damian and Melissa remained in the waiting room, performing for others, crying, hugging each other, grieving the loss of their in-laws with a precision that was almost theatrical. They had no idea that the truth was rising like a tide ready to sweep them away. Every word they spoke to one another, every whispered comment about our debts had been captured. Every plan, every justification, every lie was about to become their undoing. The detective returned an hour later, his expression a mix of satisfaction and sadness. "They're arrested," he said, "both Damian and Melissa. And they're trying to blame each other, which actually strengthens our case. But there's more. During the arrest, we found a digital recorder in Damian's backpack. He had been monitoring your conversations for weeks. The trip to the mountain wasn't spontaneous, it was premeditated." My chest tightened. They had been watching us, planning our deaths carefully, treating us like pawns rather than parents. Then he explained the financial angle. Damian wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. Dangerous debts, lenders who would kill him if he didn't pay, and only our inheritance could save him. Our lives, our wealth had become a lifeline for someone I had loved without reservation. I felt a cold rage settle over me, tempered by grief. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. They hadn't just wanted money, they had wanted our lives to survive. Over the next few days, the hospital became a theater of justice. Police interviews, lawyer consultations, and careful coordination dominated every moment. We learned that our grandchildren had been placed temporarily in social services. My heart ached for them, the innocent victims of crimes they could never understand. But we vowed that one day, we would raise them in a home filled with genuine love, not deception and manipulation. Returning home for the first time after the hospital stay was surreal. Our house had been untouched since that fateful day. Breakfast dishes sat in the sink, the bed remained unmade, and flowers Damian had brought were now wilted and dry. The familiarity was comforting and alien all at once. I felt the quiet ache of loss and betrayal in every corner, yet there was a sense of reclamation. This was our space, our life, and despite the horrors, we were still here. And through it all, the quiet, patient work of healing began. We had survived an unimaginable act of violence at the hands of our own children. But survival alone wasn't enough. Justice, truth, and love had to follow. And for our grandchildren, for the memory of Richard, and for ourselves, we would see it through. The day the arrests happened, I stayed in the hospital room with Henry. Through the window, I could see the officers moving carefully in the parking lot, positioning themselves around Damian and Melissa. The tension was unbearable. My heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from the anticipation of seeing justice finally arrive. I kept my arm in a sling, my leg propped high, but inside, a storm of emotions churned: rage, sorrow, disbelief, and the faintest glimmer of hope. Then the calls came. The police officers moved quickly, detaining both of them while they were still in the hospital waiting room. Their expressions were the first true glimpse of guilt I had ever seen. Damian's face contorted in disbelief. "This can't be happening," he shouted. Melissa tried to look shocked, her eyes darting around for an escape, but even she couldn't hide the panic. Detective Johnson entered our room, a folder of papers in hand, and I could see the relief in his eyes, the satisfaction of a case finally closing after layers of deception. "They're arrested," he said quietly. "And the evidence you and Henry provided, everything on that phone, every confession they made while thinking no one could hear, puts them in a position where they can't deny what they did." I nodded, feeling a strange calm wash over me. Years of fear and uncertainty, of hiding in plain sight, had culminated in this moment. The next hours were a blur of police interviews and lawyers' visits. I recounted every detail again, to officers and to the detective, every stolen dollar, every lie, every plan Damian and Melissa had meticulously crafted. Henry sat beside me, his hand holding mine, whispering, "We survived, Hilda. We survived." I clung to that whisper, letting it anchor me. Then came the news about the grandchildren. My heart clenched when Harriet called, her voice shaking as she described their confusion, their little faces searching for parents who had tried to destroy their grandparents. "They don't understand," she said softly. "They're asking why Mommy and Daddy can't come home." My mind reeled. These children were innocent, yet they had already been touched by betrayal and loss at an age far too young. But we vowed, Henry and I, that we would be the family they deserved. We would be the safe place in a world that had shown them cruelty. Too soon. Days passed, and the trial date was set. I spent hours preparing myself, working with the lawyer Albert, who had guided us through the legal labyrinth. "Your testimony will be crucial," he told me. "Every detail you provide will help the jury see the truth, the premeditation, the theft, the betrayal. But be ready, Hilda. You will face your son in court. You will hear his lawyers try to twist the narrative. It will be emotionally devastating." I nodded, though my stomach twisted at the thought. Facing Damian, my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had become unrecognizable, was something I had tried not to imagine. But I knew it was necessary. For Richard, for Henry, for the grandchildren. The trial day arrived, and as I entered the courtroom, the weight of the past decades pressed on me. Damian sat there, his posture rigid, his eyes cold. Melissa beside him, trying to appear devastated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But their facades were fragile. The evidence we had painstakingly gathered, Henry's recordings, the confessions, the financial records, was solid. The truth had a weight they couldn't escape. When I took the stand, I felt every injury, every scar, every bruise of betrayal and survival all at once. I looked directly at Damian, and for a moment, I saw not my son, but a stranger who had taken his place. My voice, steady despite the tears threatening to spill, recounted every detail: the argument that led to Richard's death, the embezzlement, the plan to push us off the cliff. I spoke of the fear, the pain, the helplessness, and the betrayal. "Damian," I said, my eyes locking with his, "I don't know who you are anymore. My son died the night you killed Richard. What has been living in his place for 25 years is a monster I unknowingly helped raise." The jury listened, rapt. I described the meticulous planning, the rehearsed lies, the casual cruelty that Damian and Melissa had exhibited. I shared the recordings Henry had made, moments when they had confessed, moments when they believed no one was listening. Every word was a knife through years of deception, and yet it was also a key unlocking justice. After 3 days of deliberation, the verdict came. Both Damian and Melissa were found guilty of first-degree murder for Richard's death and first-degree attempted murder for the plot against us. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Relief washed over me in waves, mingled with exhaustion and grief. Justice had been served, but the scars of betrayal remained. 1 year later, Henry and I slowly began to rebuild our lives. Our wounds had healed physically enough for mobility, but the emotional recovery was a longer journey. And yet, amidst the quiet of our home, a new purpose emerged. The grandchildren, innocent and fragile, became our responsibility, our chance to offer love, stability, and a life free from manipulation and cruelty. Every night, I tucked them into bed, telling them stories of Richard, the uncle they never met, the man who was kind, honest, and full of dreams. I watched their faces light up with understanding, with curiosity, with love for someone they never knew, yet feel deeply connected to. Henry and I provide a home where laughter replaces fear, where hugs replace manipulation, where truth is honored and justice upheld. And in the quiet moments, as I sit by the window, watching the sunset, I reflect on the lessons life has taught me. Trust must be earned. Love can be both fragile and resilient, and courage can emerge even from the most excruciating pain. Despite unimaginable betrayal, despite the darkness, we survived. And through survival, through truth, and through love, we reclaimed not only our lives, but the lives of those who deserved a chance at innocence and joy. Even with the verdict behind us, the house felt strange, as though the walls themselves were holding the echoes of what had happened. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, reminded me of that day on the gorge, of the weight of betrayal I had carried in silence for decades. Henry sat in his favorite chair, reading quietly, his crutches leaning against the wall. I watched him for a moment, the familiar lines of his face softened by relief, but still etched with the memory of our near death. The quiet was almost sacred, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the trial, the hospital, the police, and the media. The children were beginning to adjust. At first, they were scared of every loud noise, every raised voice, every sudden movement. I remember one evening, little Emma clinging to my arm, whispering, "Grandma, are you going to leave too?" My heart broke in two. I held her close, stroked her hair, and whispered, "No, my sweet girl. I am here, and I am not going anywhere. You are safe now." And slowly, very slowly, trust began to take root. Their laughter started to return, fragile but genuine, and it was the first real sound of life reclaiming our home. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, I would lie awake and think of Richard. His absence was a shadow that would never fully lift. I would tell the grandchildren stories about him, not just the tragedy, but the person he had been, clever, funny, caring. I wanted them to know him as more than just a name, to keep his memory alive in our hearts. It was my way of honoring the son I had lost to my other son's greed and cruelty. Henry and I worked together to establish a sense of normalcy. I cooked meals, folded laundry, and helped the children with their homework. Henry read stories, played small games in the living room, and reminded me that life, even after such darkness, could still hold moments of beauty. Every gesture, every quiet conversation, was a thread weaving back the frayed fabric of our family. But the healing wasn't just for us. It was also for the grandchildren. They asked questions, innocent, probing, sometimes painful. "Why don't Mommy and Daddy come home?" asked little Lucas one morning, his small hands gripping mine. I knelt beside him, holding his gaze. "They made very bad choices," I said softly. "They hurt people they should have loved, and they have to face the consequences. But you are safe, and you are loved. That will never change." His eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. The first steps toward understanding had begun. The media had followed the case closely, but we decided to keep a low profile. Our priority was the children, not public attention. When reporters called, I politely declined interviews, explaining that we were focused on family and healing. Henry agreed. The less noise, the better. For the first time in years, the outside world could wait. One afternoon, while folding Emma's tiny clothes, I paused and inhaled deeply. The scent of fresh laundry mixed with the faint aroma of the garden outside, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace that had been foreign to me for decades. I realized that survival wasn't just about escaping death. It was about reclaiming life, piece by fragile piece. We met with our lawyer again to discuss formal adoption of the grandchildren. The process was long and emotionally draining, but it was worth every tear and every anxious thought. Henry and I wanted them to know that they had a permanent home, that their lives would no longer be dictated by the selfishness of their biological parents. During the meeting, I held Henry's hand tightly, both of us silently acknowledging that this step was as much for us as it was for them to rebuild our family from the rubble of betrayal. Sometimes I would catch myself replaying the gorge incident in my mind. I saw Damian and Melissa's faces, the cruel satisfaction in their eyes, the way they had calculated every step, every lie. And yet, when I remembered the moments after, lying broken and bleeding beside Henry, I felt a different kind of strength, the quiet, unyielding courage that had carried us through. It was a reminder that even in the depths of human cruelty, resilience and love could prevail. Henry's voice one night broke my reverie. "Do you think we'll ever be whole again?" he asked softly, sitting beside me on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. I leaned my head on his shoulder, letting the warmth of his presence settle over me. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same," I whispered, "but we're alive. We have each other. And for the first time, we have the truth on our side. That's enough for now." The children thrived in small, surprising ways. Emma began to sing again, her voice timid at first, then growing stronger. Lucas started drawing, filling pages with colorful scenes of imaginary worlds where kindness always prevailed. Each moment of joy, each laugh, was a quiet victory over the years of manipulation and fear. Henry and I watched them with pride, knowing that our perseverance had created a safe space for them to grow. I sometimes catch myself reflecting on the lessons life has forced me to learn. Trust can be broken, love can be weaponized, and even those closest to you can harbor unimaginable darkness. But courage, patience, and the pursuit of truth can turn despair into justice, helplessness into empowerment. Every day, I remind myself that survival is not just about enduring, it's about reclaiming your story, protecting innocence, and ensuring that justice is served, no matter how long it takes. Evenings are quiet now. I sit with the grandchildren, telling them stories about Richard, about family, about love that persists even when betrayal strikes. They ask questions, sometimes simple, sometimes complex. I answer honestly, always mindful of their innocence, always teaching them that truth and kindness matter, even when the world shows cruelty. Henry and I have started tending the garden again. Each plant, each bloom, feels like a symbol of renewal. We nurture life now where once we had only survived. And as I water the flowers, listening to the soft hum of the wind through the trees, I feel a sense of hope that had been absent for far too long. Our journey isn't perfect. Trauma leaves traces that never fully fade. Some nights, I wake from dreams of the gorge, the fall, the betrayal, but then I look at Henry, at the grandchildren, at the life we are rebuilding. And I remember that even after darkness, light can return. And sometimes, just before bedtime, when the children are asleep and the house is still, I whisper to Henry, "We did it. We survived. We saved them. We saved ourselves." And he squeezes my hand, a quiet acknowledgement that despite everything, we are here, still together, still strong, still fighting for what is right. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself sitting alone on the porch, watching the stars. The silence feels sacred, as if the universe itself is reminding me that we survived something unimaginable. I think of Richard, of the life that was stolen, and I feel both grief and gratitude. Grief for what we lost, gratitude for what we still have. The children sleep soundly upstairs, their small breaths steady and safe. They will never know the fear we endured, the nights spent bleeding and broken, pretending to be dead, while our own flesh and blood betrayed us. But they will grow up knowing love that is real, unwavering, and true. That is the legacy Henry and I can give them, a life free from the shadows of greed and cruelty that once haunted our family. I have learned that courage doesn't roar. Sometimes, it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "I will try again tomorrow." It's in the small acts of patience, care, and teaching. It's in protecting innocence and standing for truth, even when it seems impossible. Henry and I survived because we trusted one another, because we clung to life even when every part of our bodies screamed surrender, and because we refused to let the darkness of others define the story of our lives. The trial was brutal, emotionally exhausting. Looking at Damian in the courtroom, I realized that the boy I had raised no longer existed. In his place was someone unrecognizable, shaped by greed and manipulation, stripped of empathy. But justice prevailed. The life sentences handed down to Damian and Melissa were not just legal victories, they were proof that truth, patience, and courage can overcome even the deepest betrayal. Adopting the grandchildren is the next chapter of our journey. Each day is a reminder that love can heal, that family is not just defined by blood, but by care, protection, and devotion. When I tuck the children into bed, I tell them stories of kindness, honesty, and the uncle they never met, but whose memory guides us. I tell them that even when people betray us, the world still holds goodness, and they are safe within it. I know life will never be perfect. The trauma, the memories, the knowledge of what Damian and Melissa did, these will always be a part of me. But I also know this: survival is not just about living through pain. It's about reclaiming life, love, and truth, and passing those lessons forward. Every laugh of the children, every quiet evening with Henry, every breath I take is a reminder that even after the deepest betrayal, life can be beautiful again. To anyone listening to this story, I want you to remember something. Betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. Greed, lies, and cruelty exist even where love should reside. But courage, patience, and a steadfast commitment to truth can protect you, can give you the strength to survive, and can ultimately reclaim what is rightfully yours. Life will test you, and sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought in silence, in the shadows of your own home. But even then, you can prevail. I hope my story reminds you that you are never truly alone. That even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, there is hope. That even when trust is broken, love can rebuild. And that when justice is pursued with courage, patience, and truth, the light of integrity can shine through the darkest of times. Henry and I still hold each other's hands every night, feeling the weight of our past but also the quiet promise of tomorrow. And as I look into the faces of the grandchildren, I know that Richard's memory, our survival, and our love will guide them through life. Because even in the aftermath of betrayal, the human heart is capable of extraordinary resilience. This is our story, our survival, our victory, and in telling it, I hope you find the courage to protect what is precious, to stand for the truth, and to never give up even when the world seems determined to break you.